place. And after that it leaked out in the neighbourhood, it was in Essex near Romford, that the young lady, who, by the way, was a large heiress, had gone off her head, presumably with grief, and had been confined in an asylum, where she was presumed still to remain. Perhaps it was the thinking of this one woman's face, the woman he had once seen walking down the drift, her figure lined out against the stormy sky, that led him to think of the other face, the face hidden in the madhouse. At any rate, with a sigh, or rather a groan, he swung himself round from the gate and began walking homeward at a brisk pace. The drift that he was following was known as the Mile Drift, and had in ancient times formed the approach to the gates of Honham Castle, the seat of the ancient and honourable family of de la Mole, sometimes written as de la Mole in history and ancient writings. Honham Castle was now nothing but a ruin, with a manor house built out of the wreck on one side of the square, and the broad way that led to it from the high road which ran from Boisingham. The local country town was a drift or a grass lane. Colonel Quaritch followed this drift till he came to the high road, and then turned to the left. A few minutes' walk brought him to a drive opening out of the main road on the left as he faced toward Boisingham. This drive, which was some 300 yards long, led up a rather sharp slope to his own place, Honham Cottage, or Molehill, as the villagers called it, a title calculated to give a keen impression of a neat spick-and-span red brick villa with a slate roof. As a matter of fact, however, it was nothing of the sort, being a building of the 15th century, as a glance at its massive flint walls was sufficient to show. In ancient times there had been a large abbey at Boisingham, 2 miles away, which, as the records show, in the 15th century suffered terribly from an outbreak of the plague. At this the monks obtained by grant from the de la Mole of the day 10 acres of land, known as the Molehill, and so named either on account of its resemblance to a molehill, of which more presently, or after the family. On this elevated spot, which was supposed to be peculiarly healthy, they built the little house now known as Honham Cottage, whereto to fly when next the plague should visit them. And as they built it, so, with some slight additions, it had remained to this day, for in those ages men did not skimp their flint and oak and mortar. It was a beautiful little spot upon the flat top of a swelling hill, which comprised the 10 acres of grazing ground originally granted, and was, wonderful to say, to this day the most magnificently timbered piece of ground in the countryside. For on the 10 acres of grassland there were over 50 great oaks, some of them pollards of the most enormous antiquity, and others which had originally, no doubt, grown very close together, fine upstanding trees with a wonderful length and girth of bole. This place old Mrs. Massey, Colonel Quaritch's aunt, had bought nearly 30 years before, when she became a widow, and now it had, together with a modest income of 200 a year, passed to him under her will. Shaking himself clear of his sad thoughts, Harold Quaritch turned round at his own front door to contemplate the scene. The long, single-storied house stood, as it had been said, at the top of the rising land, and to the south and west and east commanded as beautiful a view as is to be seen in that country. There, a mile or so away to the south, situated in the midst of grassy grazing grounds, flanked on either side by still perfect towers, frowned the massive gateway of the old Norseman castle. Then to the west, almost at the foot of the molehill, the ground broke away in a deep bank clothed with timber, which led the eye down by slow descents into the beautiful valley of the Elle. Here the silver river wound its gentle way through lush and poplar-bordered marshes, where the cattle stand knee-deep in flowers, past quaint old wooden mill-houses, through Boisingham Old Common, windy-looking even now, and brightened here and there with a dash of golden gorse, till it was lost in the picturesque cluster of red-tiled roofs that marked the ancient town. Look which way he would, the view was lovely, and equal to any to be found in the eastern countries, where the scenery is fine enough in its own way, whatever people whose imaginations are so weak that they require a mountain and a torrent to excite them into activity, may choose to say the contrary. Behind the house to the north there was no view, and for a good reason, for here, in the very middle of the back garden, rose a mound of large size and curious shape, which completely shut the landscape out. What this mound, which may perhaps have covered half an acre of ground, was, nobody had any idea. Some learned folk said that it was a Saxon tumulus, a presumption to which its ancient name, Dead Man's Mount, seemed to give colour. Other folk, however, yet more learned, declared that it was an ancient British dwelling, and pointed triumphantly to a hollow at the top where the ancient Britishers were supposed to have moved, lived, and had their being, which must, urged the other party, have been a very damp one. Thereon the late Mrs. Massey, who was a British dwellingite, proceeded to show with much triumph how they had lived in that hole, by building a huge mushroom-shaped roof over it, and thereby turning it into a summer house, which, owing to unexpected difficulties in the construction of the roof, cost a great deal of money. But as the roof was slated, and it was found necessary to pave the hole with tiles and cut surface drains in it, the result did not clearly prove its use as a dwelling place before the Roman conquest, nor did it make a very good summer house. Indeed, it now served as a store place for the gardeners and for rubbish generally. End of chapter 1.